We're back.
Well, sort of. John went away, and we planned for that. But we didn't look after when John went away, and I went away right afterwards, so we didn't have any time to record. So we're now recording the day after this episode is meant to be out. Yep, thumbs
Pretty
up.
much.
So while I was away, I accumulated a fair amount of notifications and messages. Not doing anything online for a week, they tend to stack up and backlog. And to my surprise, because of how simple my system is, I went through so I had 900 plus emails across my different email accounts to go through. I hadn't read any of them because I was away. Then I had, I don't know, more than 99 notifications on Twitter and more than 99 notifications on YouTube. It just said 99 plus. I don't know how many there were. I just know there was a lot. And then I had my RSS feeds to go through as well in Zotero, which there's like 15 journals. So I think they publish about 15 to 20 articles in a month. And obviously we started the month. So yeah, that's a lot of papers to go through. But I did all of that in an hour. I went through it all in an hour. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And that's what happens when you don't overcomplicate things.
Yeah, I'm pretty proud of myself because previously that would have taken me so long. And the overcomplication could come in where, and this is where I think a lot of people can overcomplicate their systems is, I have an email. I need to tag, process, respond, do X, Y, Z to the thing rather than doing, I think Tiago calls it a light touch or a first touch, whatever. But basically, I looked at the email and went, do I need to respond? Yes, I will star it. Do I need to respond? No, I will delete it. Basically. And I went through and just deleted so many emails. And then the 700 plus emails went to like 20 that I actually needed to respond to. And then I responded to them in the quickest, simplest, easiest way. A lot of them were, can you help with X, Y, and Z? And it was just a case of reading the email and saying, give me more specifics. Because a lot of people are just general with their emails towards me. Like to me, they're like, hey, I like X thing or I like Y thing. Can you tell me how to do Z thing? And I'm like, yeah, you're going to have to be more specific about that. So I was quite lucky and fortunate in that a lot of my responses were similar, but I do have responses today that require actual like brain power, but I know exactly where they are, what I need to do with them. And it's just simple. And then all the other stuff is just, do I want to watch it? Yes or no. And I just have a big list of like a watch later on YouTube. I have a massive episode list on podcasts, and I have a massive read later list on Zotero, but that it's sorted and organized, that I just work with it when I need to. But John, you went away as well. So how did you not overcomplicate your stuff?
It was very much it wasn't really overcomplicated. It was just when I wanted it, I could go back to it. And when I was ready for it, I carried on. It's very nice to just, when I was in Notion for everything and coming back into Notion again, when I got back, it's like, got to deal with this, got to process that, got to move things around. But with everything else, it's just like, all done. It was so like, there is a big difference between the way that Notion is designed and the way that the rest of the way I work is designed, which is very much just around me and not complicated. Whereas I'm balancing like different people's needs in Notion instead of just my own, which adds a sense of complexity no matter what. But being able to just have my own stuff, it was easily dealt with and quick and simple. And even the stuff I had to do inside of Notion was simple enough. I just got through it. Emails dealt with. I didn't even have to deal with very many emails because one, I have a team who does that for me, so I'm pretty fortunate with that. And there wasn't too much I needed to worry about. Everything was automatically done for me. So I came back in, I could see where all my leads are coming in. I could see whether I had important emails. It was just done automatically. So I didn't have to think about it. And then when I'm ready to process the information, I can. Did I get to inbox zero? No, I do not care about inbox zero. Inbox zero is so stupid.
Overrated. Because I have an inbox zero most of the time.
Yeah, but you're not consciously trying to reach it. Are you consciously trying to reach inbox zero? Is that a goal of yours, or is it just
Depending on how you define goal, I could say yes or no. I would probably say it is a target, it's a direction I head towards. I lean towards having nothing in my inbox, but if there's something in my inbox, I know I need to do something. Like, for example, my message from my PhD potential supervisor, that's a complicated story for another time. His email has been in my inbox for over 2 weeks now, I think, because he emailed me while I was in London and then away. And then I came back and I still haven't responded because I need to actually like think about it. It's one of the emails still in my inbox. So I don't have an inbox zero, but the 250 something in my main inbox went very, very quickly. It was either archived because I'd read it, I'd actioned it, archived it, or I didn't need it and I deleted it.
yeah.
So yeah, it's most of the time, like by the end of today, I will have inbox zero because there's only 3 emails in my inbox. And the other email accounts that I have are already inbox zero. So it is a target. It's not something I need to hit, but it's the direction that I go towards.
So it's very much like I'm going this way. If you hit it, great. If you don't, also great. It's like a thing that's there, but it's not really a big deal.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's how I see, trying to not get complex here, that's how I see my open goals. Yeah, that's how I see my open goals moving towards targets and directions, which is part of adult learning. So, and actually some of the research that's coming out with pedagogy, but we won't go there. That's getting into my research head. Yeah.
There's a part of me that wants to know, and then a part of me that's like, I haven't slept enough for this.
Yeah, that is. I think one of the things that I got out of going away is because I wasn't at my computer. It's talking ecological dynamics. I didn't have the affordances to easily do X, Y, Z. So if I had a thought or a question or anything I wanted to explore, it just went into my Obsidian, which I now have like a massive list of stuff that I could have a look through, which is what I would do anyway. But if I was on my computer, I would have already had a brief look. So I would have used something like Elicit, or we're not talking about that now. I would have used something like Elicit or gone through some articles that I already had in Zotero and gone, oh, what can I link to this? What can I have that? And I would already have a start on a topic. But because I didn't have the affordances to do that, my exploration, instead of going, oh, here's a topic, let's see where we can go, was, I can't do that yet. I'm going to put that aside. And most of my focus when I was thinking about something was around the one page I was working on, which was ecological dynamics. So it was nice to have a focus on just one page and working on one page, but it was very difficult for me in the way that my mind works to stay there. So it was kind of like, it was refreshing because it was simplified, but it was also frustrating because it was simplified.
Yeah, I had a similar experience. So while I was away, it was an event, like a 5-day conference thing. One thing that I was actually designing was a way of easily following up with people. Now, normally I would just use Notion. However, Notion is offline. I wouldn't have as much internet connection. So I couldn't, I did not have the affordances I normally would have with being online all the time. I was abroad in the US, which meant my internet was patchy at best. So I couldn't use that. So I had to think outside of what I would normally use. Thought, okay, I could use Obsidian. And I was like, that's not useful to me. I didn't find Obsidian a good idea. I didn't want to use Obsidian for it. So I didn't. I'm like, okay, well, what do I want to do? And actually being able to go in there and going, okay, well, what do I need? I just need somewhere quick to capture an a scan of someone's business card and their name and their email, and the rest is done by me. And I'm like, well, that's all I need. Everything else is irrelevant right now. I was like, okay, cool. How do I do that? And in the end, because I was designing this as I was running a workshop while I was out there on a starter system for networking. I'm like, well, what would be the easiest way of doing that? And it turned out I just ended up using OneNote because I was familiar enough with OneNote to use it. I could have used Evernote as well, but I prefer OneNote if I have to choose one of those. And it was really interesting to use the constraints of the app again, because all I needed was a name and an email, and I had I created a very simple template which I just duplicated because it took a couple of seconds to duplicate a page, and it was all offline, and then it synced when I wanted it to. And it was interesting to actually play within that of like, okay, this is what I've got, this is all I need, so let's just use what I've got and what I don't need to worry about. And it was quite fun to do that. And it kind of was super darn simple instead of overcomplicating it. Whereas if I set it up in Obsidian, I would have had the people, I would have had the people folder and this and that. And yeah, I could have made it a little bit easier, but I wouldn't have, because why would I do that? I would have ended up having way too much fun with Obsidian. Whereas with Evernote, with OneNote and Evernote, you get what you get. And that's about it.
That right there, I think, is what the way I see it. The struggle most people have with a lot of the tools is because they have the features, they feel like they should use them.
Yes.
Which it's a skill that I have developed, and I think it is a skill that I only use the things that I really need. Now, for those that know my Obsidian use, I use literally every feature under the sun. I think the only one I don't use is actually embedding the linked blocks and headings, because I don't find them useful. But in my course, I do embed them because that's the affordances that I need. But in the situation where you had what you were going through, I would have just made a note and had the person there. If I needed a picture, I would have added the picture. It's not difficult if you know your way around adding pictures in Obsidian. And I think for some people in some environments, because there are too many affordances and they don't have the personal constraint yet, because they haven't developed those skills, they don't have the personal constraints, which, depending on your view in ecological dynamics, you could argue is expertise. Because they don't have those constraints, they find it harder to do something that is really, really simple. And I think that's where the misconceptions about tools for thought in general come in. People say, oh, the general population will never use these. No, the general population will never use the majority of the advanced features, but they can still use these as apps. But it requires expertise to add personal constraints to the affordances that you're given. And that is a skill that I think it's in the PKM space, but it's not spoken about as a skill. It's just something you do. It doesn't really have a name. Going back to, I can't remember what it's called, hypocognition. I haven't looked at my research for a while. Hypocognition, if you don't have a name for something or you don't have a chunk of information for it, you don't know about it, essentially. And I think a lot of people are hypocognitive of this skill because they don't have a name for this thing, this skill of, I have all these features, but I don't need to use them all.
Yeah, and that was something that happened. So I ran a workshop while I was out there. It's like I flipped the script from like features first to like what you actually need first. And through going through that process, even just in my own stuff, it was like, well, yeah, I could use Obsidian. It was something that I was familiar with, but did I really want to, like, I already had something built in Obsidian that would mean I would put myself into that system when really what I needed is just a place to put a damn name and a damn email address and a couple of notes. And now I'm back. I was able to open it on my phone and go, oh, cool. Yeah, there, done. Will I ever use OneNote again? No, but it was there for what I needed at the time. And I think that's something that, because I went the opposite direction of what I actually needed and what I was actually tracking, versus doing it the other way where it's like feature first, which is never, ever, ever, ever a good idea. Because you're just like, oh, yes. Oh, yes.
I find it interesting that you went to OneNote, because what you were saying there, I know you sort of like cut yourself back a couple of times, but you said you had a system in Obsidian and you felt like you had to. That was the word that you kept, like, I felt like I had to, or I should have done. Like it's kind of like you had something in your head, you had a framework or model, whatever you want to call it, and you're like, if I'm going to use Obsidian, I need to do this.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like you wanted to do something new or start something different. You would like, I want to do this in a different place. Sort of like separating Obsidian to do this thing, I need somewhere else. You couldn't do something different, but the same in the app, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that is kind of the thing, because then it would be the management of it. I'd want to organize what I did differently. I could have just created a new vault in hindsight. That would have worked.
Yeah, but so I'm not criticizing. It's just interesting how your first thought, and obviously your actionable thought, was not to use the tool you're familiar with or use the potentially easiest tool there because of preconceived thoughts, preconceived notions, and potentially even like your own mental bucket of the tool. Like,
yeah,
this tool is for this thing. And
yeah,
I don't know whether this is true. This is, again, me speaking from listening to what you're saying, but you constrained yourself away from using something you're comfortable with because of previous experience, which is just, it's counterproductive, but also productive at the same time. It's just, it's interesting how brains work.
yeah, and I think that the additional constraints helped me focus on what I was actually trying to do, rather than having all the knowledge I have in Obsidian, having all the knowledge I have. I mean, Notion wasn't even a thing I could use. That was just like,
that's out of the question.
My first port of call was going to be Obsidian, but then I was trying to fit it into the structures I already had, which wasn't, I think what it was that stopped me from using Obsidian is there was no structure. That is what got in my way.
So I'm curious, inside of your OneNote, did you just have one big note, or did you have multiple files, like a file per person?
Yeah, so I had I had one notebook and then one note per person.
Right. Yeah, because as soon as you start explaining it, I'm like, why didn't you just add a new note? Because that's what you do in Obsidian, just add new note on your phone. And if you wanted it in a folder, you could have just made a folder and then sort it out when you got home. But it sounds like instead of doing that in Obsidian, you went to OneNote and essentially did the same thing, which obviously both way works. It doesn't really matter. It's just interesting that you actively chose to use a different tool, because I'm trying to figure this out in my head, because this relates to my research, because as a learner, when we're going through steps, there is stages of the Dunning-Kruger effect where we think we know a lot, where we don't, and we're constantly experiencing these different moments. And the way that I see this experience, like that experience for you, is you had the information because you knew what you needed in the environment. You had the information in the tool as well because you knew what the tool could do. But similar with the template and call out block example that I went through like before the course, like you knew you could do it, but you couldn't, for whatever reason in your head, figure out how to do it, if that makes sense. So you're like, I don't know how to do this in this environment, so I'm going to go over there and do it because I can conceptualize how to do it over there, which is why I use OneNote. It's just, how did my question in my head is like, how would you then as you in the moment challenge that thought, like, because that in theory is learning, because you're challenging your own conceptual understanding of the environment. Because you had the information, you had the tool, you had the environment, you had everything you needed, you just couldn't see how to do it. And now we're talking about it. You said in hindsight, I could have done X, Y, Z.
Yeah.
But why couldn't you see that in the moment? Because you had all the information there. And
That's
that block,
interesting.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what the block is. Because we all do it. We all do it in loads of different environments and situations. And that's like the light bulb moment. You're like, oh, duh, why didn't I do that?
Yeah. And it's like, I could have done it that way. I think there was also I think there was another layer of like, I was running a workshop on creating a system with people who don't have what I already have. And so there was also I think there was a subconscious thing of like, let's create a block, so that I had to think in a similar way. There might have been a little bit of that there in reflection. There may have been that extra layer that I wanted to put on top just to see what it was like to actually
put yourselves
have to
in
do
them
it.
shoes.
Yeah, and to have that additional thing. And it was a nice piece of content that I could produce. That was really easy. There were lots of different layers. But yeah, it is interesting. I could have actually just done exactly the same thing in my Obsidian. And it's pretty simple.
I think that is, I mean, again, using a term from ecological dynamics, that's metastable attenuation. That's where you're attuning to the affordances you can perceive in the environment. Just because you can see the information doesn't mean you can like actually use the information. Is the same as every novice learner. You see the same thing as an expert learner. An expert learner has the attunement of the affordances in the environment to see what they can do and what they shouldn't do, etc., etc. And it's interesting to see that, because I've been reading around obviously ecological dynamics and the overcomplicated systems that we use. From speaking here and from my own thoughts around the topic, they are overcomplicated because we don't understand how to make them simple, because we haven't attuned the affordances in the environment, which links to John Sweller's work in cognitive load theory around we can all organize information. We just struggle when it is complicated information, because as soon as you understand it, you're like, oh, well, that goes there, and that goes there. Easy. If you don't understand those either high up level concepts or the outline or whatever, then you're like, oh, now I need to do all of this stuff. And when I look at people's systems, it's funny because of Esme's tweet. It makes me think of Esme when she started using Notion. Sorry if you're listening, but when she started using Notion, she had loads of properties, loads of databases, loads of stuff all over the place. And me, as someone that had used it for years, was like, no, don't see the point, don't get it. And as her expertise increased in Notion, from my understanding, the properties decreased and databases decreased because she knew what she wanted. And I think she knew better how to organize information. I don't want to put words in her mouth, but that's how it comes across to me. You could probably speak better on her specific situation, but what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I can't talk for her, but I can talk for myself as I have built my systems, and especially let's go Notion specific. Like they have become simpler and simpler and simpler because I just don't need to think about it half as much anymore, because it's just like I don't need 80 million properties. I mean, I've never been a property person. I've always found too many properties, too much.
Been a PP.
I have been a PP. Yeah, I've never been too much of I like lots of properties. In fact, they stress me. Seeing lots of properties, just I want something very like, I go in, I do what I need to do, and then I leave. I don't need to be structuring this and the more I have to try and play with it, the slower it is.
Yeah, and I think that is one of those things in the learning curve. Again, this is me hypothesizing. The learning curve in the PKM is when you start, you don't really have much, and it's not really organized, or you don't think it's organized, but it is. Um, you don't suddenly get organized using PKM. It's already organized because you already have systems, ecological dynamics, and systems theory. Insert science. But
Sorry.
the learning journey, I think, as you get into what.
It was just you want to insert science.
Oh yeah, I'm not. Yeah, like 7 of my pages that have got like 4,000 words on and like 100 references each, just that stuff. But the learning journey, I think, as you go into the PKM world, reading the Building a Second Brain book that Tiago's just published, or anything else in that field, it's kind of like, oh, I have all of these things. And because you don't know what they are, you're like, I need to use them all. And then see if they all work. And then you figure out that most of them don't work for you, or most of the systems that are out there, and there are a lot of them, don't work for you because it's not for you, it's for them. And then you end up going almost back exactly where you started. It just in a different app, maybe with a couple of other skills, but that is the learning journey. And I don't think you can skip it. I don't think you should avoid it, but I think that's where a coach and an educator is helpful in that journey to speed up the big, I'm lost. Oh, okay, this is what I could do. But then we get into how does that educator, instructor, coach, teacher, whatever, use, how do they use the either environment or their instruction to guide you? And is it beneficial or not, effective or not? And that's, again, insert research, loads of science.
It's going to be a new thing, insert research.
Have you not heard me say it in some of my videos? I'm just like,
insert
actually,
science.
I might have cut those bits out. Yeah, I'm just like, insert science there, because it's so hard to it's that right there is where I would link to the page. Like in my Obsidian in my head, I'm like, oh yeah, that word is this block, that word is this block, that word is this block, and this whole block is going to be linked into that paragraph. And I can see all the connections in my head, but I'm like, yeah, just insert science. It's just stuff.
Footnote.
Various footnotes, yes.
Footnote 175.
I was I had because obviously inline footnotes, you have the numbers. I was scrolling down my page and I was like, there's a lot on this page. That's why my note-taking note, I combined Building a Second Brain with note-taking. I just have call-out blocks of references down the bottom because I got sick of seeing like footnote 276. I was like, I have no idea what that is. So I've just got like the call-out blocks at the bottom of the page, like this stuff, this stuff, this stuff, this, and I just linked to the call-out block rather than having like basically a line of footnotes. Yeah.
That reminds me, one of the things that I was doing while I was away was creating a couple of pages, and I put reference in there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, putting references in Notion is so annoying. I could have done this in Obsidian, it would have been faster, but it doesn't look as pretty, and I have normal humans who like attractive things, so we are just going to struggle and renaming them. Oh, it was so horrible. It's so horrible.
I'm curious how you did that then, because like with me referencing, I use the citation plugin, I have a site code, and then I just bracket, reference, done. But how did you do that in Notion?
It was manual with the little arrows, and then one, you can't use subscripts.
No, because that's in my math.
You have to do it like a normal. Yeah, it was annoying.
I was in like a manual, like 1 footnote, 1, 2, 2, 3. Oh. Yeah, no, thank you.
Yeah, it was not fun at all.
I would have used like 4. Like that. That's it. I've scrolled up and down this page enough.
I think I got to 5 and then was like, you know what, screw this, they can do the rest of the research themselves.
I mean, I think that's why lecturers don't have that many references like for presentations and stuff, because they're like, I can't be bothered, which is why Obsidian And tools like Obsidian with referencing it's so good for anyone that wants to research their resource their stuff. Like if you want sources, use a tool that makes it easy, which is one of the reasons I think people don't, because finding the citation from like either Google Scholar or whatever citation tool you're using, and then putting it in either in the description of the video or a link somewhere, you have to get the link, etc., etc. For me, in my system, because I push a button in the browser for it to be in Zotero, and then I push a hotkey on my keyboard, and then it's done. Like it's 2 button pushes.
It's annoying.
Yeah, make it simple. Don't overcomplicate systems.
And I think also there's a lot of, when it comes to overcomplicating the systems, it's almost like trying to overcompensate.
Do you want to add some clarity?
No. Yeah, it's when you're building your systems, you're trying to build all of these. What I've seen is all of these like pieces that are like there because they should be there, because you feel you should have them, versus that you actually want them, need them. Going back to our topic earlier about loads of properties. Because when you start adding loads of properties, especially in Notion, you then have to make sure they all link. And then you have to use these special things to make sure that you don't go onto the pages, or it just adds friction. And depending on how much friction you're happy with will depend on how much you end up using it. And there comes a point where it becomes useless and unhelpful. And then you strip it back and start again.
It's interesting you say that, because while you were speaking, obviously my head is in ecological dynamics at the moment. But while you're speaking, I see that as like siloed information as the fundamentals of whatever skill it is. Now, organization is, to use a term from John Sweller, is a natural biological primary skill, not secondary skill. And it's a primary skill because you do it. You naturally organize information. It's the way our brain works. It's the way that we function. The only reason we would need to use secondary skills to organize information is if we don't understand it, like I said previously. And the siloing of information is to make things slightly easier, because you can say, okay, I'm going to focus on this thing now. I'm going to focus on this thing now, because you don't quite understand what's going on. And this is where I think that big learning curve that we alluded to earlier, where the instructor, educator, whoever, I'm going to call them educators because that's what the name of my page is. I've just bundled like everyone into educators. Because I was like, I can't spread them out anymore. Yeah, so the educator, I think if they're taking an ecological dynamics approach, there aren't silos because it's just one system. Yeah. If they're taking a more information processing approach and there are fundamentals you need to know, there will be silos that have been built up because you need to know this to do X, Y, Z in forwards, and you need to do this to do all of this in front. But they might not work for the person because the information processing approach suggests there is a best way, which, depending on your views and your paradigm of thought, you might disagree. And I do disagree with that. Like, there's one best way. I think it's something that needs to emerge through the environments that you create. And the environments that most people create are not to allow for the emergence of their own organization. It's here's some things you need to do. Yeah. And yes, it's useful as worked examples, but most people with worked examples don't use them as worked examples and say, oh, okay, that worked over there. I'm now going to create this from the environment that my coach or my educator has given me. It's, oh, this is a worked example. I'm going to use this now.
Yeah, and there'll be no other changes. That's it. That is the correct way of working. Yeah, absolutely. And I agree on that. There is no one way. There is a right way, and that right way is your way. Because there are best practices depending on what you're actually, best practices based on the environment you're in and what constraints you have. Yes. but it's like the best place to start, and the constraint and / affordances you always have is the person right there. That is something that
Self-organized
is,
system.
yeah, a self-organized system, which I love, just love it. And there's a lot, if you go, I'm not sure whether it's so much in the PKM space as well, but if you go slightly outside of there is like this feeling in business as well of like you have to do it a certain way. And that is the sad thing, is there's that feeling that you've got to try and change it versus having what you already have, which is already good enough.
So I'm going to use an example from skill acquisition in sport, because that's where most of the ecological research is from. But a good example of how things can emerge in a very similar way is there was a weightlifting study that comes to mind. For those unfamiliar, that's the Olympic lifting stuff with the big weights, and they try and move the bar from the floor to above their head. It's clean and jerk, and it's a skill. It's a skill that you need to develop. And what they basically did is they gave people in weightlifting that had never lifted before this skill to learn and develop. Some people were told exactly how to move. There's a certain bar path that should be used because it's the most efficient. And then there were others that were just told, get the bar from the floor above your head. Now, there were more mistakes from, I say mistakes, very loosely mistakes. There were far greater differences in movement patterns from the ecological side because they were exploring everything. They were moving the bar miles in front of them, behind them, and their body basically said, hey, that's a bad idea. That's really heavy. And the end point for both of the students, for both groups of students, was the same bar path. It was efficient and it worked. But the people that had gone through the instruction hadn't explored the other environments, and they didn't really understand why, they didn't know why, and they were lost as to why it was good. But the ecological group were like, well, yeah, because if you move it out there, you fall over. If you move it back here, the bar hits you in the face. If you move it up this way, you get a bar in the chin and it hurts. So they knew why not to do the things because of the variability of practice. Yes, weightlifting is a very dangerous, potentially dangerous activity. So there are constraints on there anyway. Like you can't just one arm lift a bar if you're not strong enough. That's an obvious physical constraint. And in business, there aren't those sorts of constraints, and it's far more varied. But that's where the educator can say, okay, we're going to constrain the environment a bit, simplify the task, and then let you explore. But you still get to the same result, just with a different learning experience. And the learning experience helps future learning, but it may take you longer to get there.
And I think that is something to embrace more, rather than just trying to get there. Everyone wants the hacks, tips, and tricks because they think they're faster, but they're actually way, way slower.
They're faster in the short term. So I think that's like early gratification rather than longer term use. And this, again, in sports, because most of this research is from sport, because sport is ahead of the curve, apparently. But early specialization and early diversification is a massive argument. And early specialization is where a lot of the time people have gone, okay, this is the best way to do things. And they're like 5, 6-year-olds learning how to kick like a size 5 football, and they can score great. Then they get to 10, 12, 15, they go through puberty, adolescent awkwardness, then they can't kick a ball because they haven't learned actually how to learn how to kick a ball. They can't develop, or they struggle to develop. They may even get injuries, and all this sort of stuff happens because they've been told how to do it the right way and not learn how to develop it themselves. And there's loads of other research and loads of other science around it, but essentially,
yeah. So this is actually a really good example, a real life example. So a friend of mine is incredible at music. He is like savant levels of musical skill, whereas I am not savant levels. But he was taught how to play the right way, and there is one way to play, and you play it that way, and that is that. Whereas for me, I was ruffling around, struggling, desperately trying to figure out how to play the things that I wanted to play, but I had that motivation from stuff I wanted to play, whereas he was just like, you just follow this, and this. Now he has reached a point where he is in his 30s, and he's now unable to learn things. He is unable to keep going and is stuck because he doesn't know how to do it, how to figure it out. It's like either I have it or I don't. And if I don't have it, it's over. And that is his like very, it kind of is a lived example of that. Whereas for me, I'm like, oh, I don't know how to do something. I'm just gonna go figure out how to do it. And he's learned that either he knows or he doesn't. And if he doesn't, he'll never learn.
Learned helplessness.
Yeah, learned helplessness, which is sucky and crummy, but that is it's a scary thing at how that can occur and how easy it is.
Oh yeah. Oh
when
yeah.
we're trying to
that's
literally
only one of many things that could happen. And it's that right there that worries me a little bit, because most of the educational field focus on the youth development pedagogy, but there are more adults in the world than there are children. And adults still learn. They still know how to learn. It's just most of the time they're not encouraged, helped, aided, facilitated in their learning. And just because you're an adult doesn't mean you're an advanced learner, because if you're starting something new, you are just like a child. But a lot of the research, for whatever reason, is, oh, a 5-year-old will learn like this. It's not a 5-year-old, it's a novice learner. They're different. Because a 5-year-old may have 5 years of experience doing something. Or you take like the 9-year-olds that are really good at music. The 9-year-old that's been playing insert instrument there for 5-6 years since they were old enough to hold the thing is going to be way better than anyone that's just starting. They could be like me. Like if I start playing the piano, I'm going to know literally nothing apart from there's white keys and black keys, and there's, what is it, like A to G? I don't even know. I don't even know what the letters are. I know there's a C. I know it's like A, B, C, D, E.
It is H, G. I had to think about that for a second, but yes.
Not gonna lie, it was like it's around there, so I'm gonna say G because I don't remember hearing an H, but I'm not sure. But yeah, that's about the extent of my knowledge. But someone that's 9 years old that's been playing for 5 years isn't a novice. They have 5 years of experience, but they're 9, and that's novice learner versus expertise learner. So the pedagogy doesn't apply to the adult, but a lot of the principles should apply to the adult as a novice learner. And that's what I think a lot of us forget as an adult. Like, you may be an adult, but you're still a novice learner, which typically has characteristics of being a child, fumbling around, not really know what's going on, making loads of mistakes, making yourself look stupid a lot of the time because you're making mistakes. And you've got to embrace it sometimes.
And that's also really hard in the way the world works. We're supposed to know what we're doing as adults.
Adults know what they're doing.
Insert political joke here.
Yep. But yeah, and I think as a sort of like to round up with the systems, overcomplicating systems is, I think, part of the learning journey that we go through, that we have to go through. And when it is overcomplicated, you'll know it's overcomplicated because you'll have tons of questions. And that's because you are learning the thing. And that's where you'd need or potentially use an educator, or try and create environments for yourself that have constraints in. If you want to be a self-directed learner, have constraints in that let skills emerge in the environment that you've created for yourself, but you need expertise in creating environments like that as a self-directed learner, which again, are skills not taught, to bring those to the forefront, which is why so many people struggle in the PKM, because most people in PKM are adult learners that haven't been taught how to create environments for themselves as self-directed learners. And there aren't coaches and educators around to teach you about PKM, because a lot of them are business creators doing their own thing, and they have their own agendas, a lot of them. And they have their own systems that are information processing directed rather than ecological dynamics, because they're hypocognitive of ecological dynamics. So the PKM space is just a mess in the learning journey, which is why everyone is asking the same questions. That's my somewhat controversial opinion. Yeah.
And then the people who are actually starting to swallow the other pill are coming to people like us. Hi. Or us. Are there others like us? I don't know.
I think there are other people that have a similar perspective, but I don't think they use the same terms, and I don't think they have the same research background as us. So we'll probably take a different paradigm of thought. I'm going to guess information processing because that's the most popular, most common, and they will probably take this is the better approach rather than create an environment with constraints and affordances for you to learn in. If you don't know how to do that, find a coach or an educator that does. But at the moment, there's not many of them.
No.
And that's what I want to change. That's my world ambition, sort of. It's a bit bold, but you've got to be bold. Aim for an A star and then like fall back to a B, and you've still done pretty well. I didn't aim for an A star at school. I just turned up and did the test. I still got B's for basically everything, but yeah, that's a whole other rant. So yeah, anything else you want to
add? No.
No.
Good.
Right. Thanks for listening. Apologies, it's a day late, but organization, we struggled.
Day late. One day late.
I can put it up later today. It's just going to be like a really, really, really late episode.
A day and a half late.
Yeah. 0.7.
Yeah. All right. 0.7.
1.7 days late. Right. Yeah. Bye, everyone.